1944, the government began to make plans for a post-war world. It passed the Town and Country Planning Act, which gave councils greater power to rebuild their towns and cities. In 1944, the Doncaster Borough Surveyor and Highways Committee came up with a plan. They asked the council to show it to an external planning expert, but they refused and put it on public display. Part of the plan expanded on pre-war schemes that had never been implemented. It included 3 bus stations, widening of nearly all the town centre streets, building 2 new ring roads, and the demolition of nearly all buildings on South Parade for a civic centre. The plan's sternest critic was an engineer, C.E. Farron, an independent voice. He was particularly scathing of a proposal to put a road through St George's Churchyard, and he also pointed out that the widening of the High Street would result in the demolition of either the Mansion House or the Westminster Bank. He thought the whole plan was just a scheme to get as many cars into and through town as quickly as possible. It was against this background that just after the war, on the 14th June 1945, 11 people gathered at 28 South Parade, the home of Mrs. Miller, a keen student of town planning. They decided to form a new society interested in the preservation and recording of ancient buildings and houses of architectural interest in the neighbourhood. In the chair for this first meeting was an architect, E.H. Walker, whose father had designed the Clock Corner building. The newly formed Civic Trust nearly foundered, but in October 1947, C. Farron took over as chairman. Major Farron was to be chair for the next 22 years, and he made the trust a recognised and respected organisation. His deputy, elected in 1947, was a scientist with the LNER called T. Henry Turner. Turner was a man with ideas ahead of his time. He was a great advocate of public participation in planning, even well before the Planning Acts came into force. It wasn't long before the first major task faced the Civic Trust, a plan to resist the proposed building of a power plant at Crimpsall. The Civic Trust opposed the plan and suggested the new plant should be built at Thorpe Marsh, which later became the main power station after the Crimpsall plant closed. Despite their opposition, the power station at Crimpsall was built. The objections to the power station, put forward by Turner, were later validated. When, in 1970, a technical assessor said the building of the station had been a poor planning choice and that it was pouring out fine dust and sulphur all over the town, much as Turner had predicted. This would not be the last of the Civic Trust's many campaigns to preserve, protect and promote Doncaster's heritage. The early setback over the siting of the power station did not deter the newly formed Doncaster Civic Trust and was followed by many success stories as they continued to preserve, protect and promote Doncaster's rich heritage. Cusworth Hall, an 18th century house, was owned by the Batty Wrightsons, but it was no longer needed by the family. Major Farron, the chairman of the trust, was very keen to rescue the hall and for it to be owned by the people of Doncaster. The purchase by the Rural District Council was completed in 1961 and the grounds were open to the public. It is now a major jewel in the Doncaster Heritage Crown. Other notable successes followed, including a successful appeal to the Magistrates' Court, preventing Regent Square from being turned into a car park. Parkinson's shop and cafe on the High Street was saved after a 16-year battle. The historic Bellevue House was saved from demolition. The building is now the Grand St Leger Hotel and is very popular during Leger Race Week. One of the Trust's major successes was in persuading the Department of the Environment in 1988 to resurvey the town centre. This was to look at which buildings should be listed, as originally the old borough was to be excluded. A suggested list was sent and as a result, 70 buildings were listed, including the Nag's Head, the railway station and Clock Corner, which as part of an earlier plan to widen Baxter Gate would have led to its demolition. Where the Trust feels that certain projects require more of a hands-on presence, it encourages and supports other volunteer organisations and has provided assistance to groups such as the Sandhouse, Friends of the Mansion House and the Grand Theatre. one of the very public success stories, saw national press attention. Christ Church is Doncaster's oldest church in the town centre, yet it was feared that the church would be lost to Doncaster. The fabric of the building had begun to deteriorate, and by 1989 had become too expensive for the congregation to maintain. The church was closed in 1989 when the Trust began its campaign to save the church from demolition. When the church was made redundant in 1991, the Trust issued a leaflet called A Church in Crisis, which received national press coverage. In 1995, the church was sold to the Reach Out Christian Fellowship for a nominal sum, and the Trust made substantial donations to help with the restoration. Part of recognising the heritage of the Doncaster borough is through the use of plaques which highlight specific buildings and acknowledges the roles played by key people in its history. The one pinned to Denison House on South Parade acknowledges the work done by Edmund Denison MP in bringing the railway to Doncaster. He was later knighted and became known as Sir Edmund Beckett. This plaque on the High Street above the Taste of Cornwall refers to it as being one of Doncaster's oldest buildings, dating back to the 16th century. A plaque celebrating Dr. Miller is located on the house next to the Minster, where he lived from 1765 to 1807. He was the organist for St. George's Church, a noted composer and musician. In 1804, he wrote a book called A History of Doncaster. Today it is recognised as an important historical work about Doncaster. A plaque was created to celebrate the Corn Exchange and Concert Hall. The architect was William Watkins. Work started in 1870 and was completed in 1873. Sir Edward Elgar conducted the London Symphony Orchestra here in 1909, and a young Winston Churchill also spoke here about his experiences during the Boer War. The Civic Trust played a key role in saving the portico for the subscription betting rooms. Built in 1826, it was used by the nobility and gentry during Leger Race Week. It has also been used for various commercial purposes, including being a cinema. This building at 5051 High Street dates back to at least 1775. In May 1817, Samuel Parkinson took the premises, trading as a grocer and tea dealer, becoming better known for its butterscotch. This house on Hall Gate was the home of Joseph Lockwood the Younger. He was a member of a prominent Doncaster family who produced stonework for buildings in and around Doncaster, including the portico for the subscription betting rooms. This building, on the corner of High Street and Scott Lane, is probably better known as the Yorkshire Penny Bank. At that time, the bank became the first to create school banks to encourage the idea of saving at an early age. It was built in 1843 and is one of several buildings designed by the architect William Hurst. 6 Regent Terrace was the home of William Hurst, one of Doncaster's most important architects. He designed Christ Church, the subscription rooms, a workhouse, a jail, and many other buildings. In 1806, the Prince of Wales, who became George IV, lodged here at the Pillared Houses on South Parade. William Lindley was the architect, and it was built in 1801. At the same time, the Duke of Clarence also lodged at the Pillared Houses, staying at the house next door. Both came for the races. Doncaster Civic Trust came to the early conclusion that buildings are not the only way to enhance a town's well-being. There are also environmental factors, none more so than the number of trees that have been planted by the Trust, resurrecting the original initiative by the Doncaster Corporation in the 1800s. Doncaster Civic Trust set up a tree fund in 1971 when money was initially raised by members. The tree fund received a major boost in 1978 when Mrs. G. Darley of Cantley Hall gave the Trust £15,000 for tree planting. Doncaster is now blessed with mature trees throughout the borough, and young trees are being planted, which will add to the future well-being of Doncaster. In some cases, the Trust offers money towards a scheme. The Trust also deals directly with groups such as the Friends of Sandal Park, amongst others. Its tree planting initiatives with Doncaster Council originally spanned a 20-year collaboration. In 2000, a Millennium Oak tree was planted on Bennett Thorpe to mark 20 years of tree planting collaboration with the MBC. A ceremonial spade of engraved stainless steel was also produced for the occasion by the Council and presented to the Trust. On a fine autumn morning of 24th November 2015, members of the Executive Committee and the Brain family gathered to watch the planting of the first of 2 specimen trees at Cusworth Hall. The Trust has sponsored them in memory of Eric and Betty Brain, who were leading members of Doncaster Civic Trust for many years. On November 16, 2016, the Civic Mayor and Mayoress, with members of the Trust's Executive Committee and Ben Russell from Green Spaces DMBC, held a tree planting ceremony in Elmfield Park. The tree was planted for National Tree Week as a First World War commemoration. The Civic Trust still continues to plant trees and has successfully negotiated with the Council again during the last few years to further develop tree planting projects. Seeks to help young people appreciate the value of great built heritage and new architecture and provide them with a better understanding of the qualities of Doncaster's many towns and villages. This approach supports the national curriculum and is planned so that they can have lots of fun learning about how buildings are designed and towns develop. Since 2011, the Trust has developed a number of initiatives with Sheffield University School of Architecture, which are proving very popular in local schools. The Doncaster Toolkit is a teaching aid to get children thinking about architecture and urban design in a Doncaster context. The toolkit was distributed free to all Doncaster schools in 2014. Each autumn, the Trust holds an architecture competition for local primary schools, which challenges kids to design exciting new buildings. In the 5 years up to 2018, we reached around 1,000 children in over 30 schools. In 2018, the children were asked to create a design for a new museum and art gallery to be built on the site of the old girls' high school in the town centre. The School of Architecture and Heritage Doncaster facilitated this fun event. The Design Challenge winners 2018 were St Albans Catholic Primary School, Dennerby, Maine. A new initiative for 2019 is a collaboration with Doncaster Council to explore how towns develop through playing the settlement game in local schools. This popular educational game was devised and pioneered by James Cobb at the former Doncaster Design Centre. The Trust also seeks to help budding architects or town planners with cash bursaries, which are available to help them pay their university fees. So far, we have assisted 8 local students this way. To assist sixth formers make the right choice of vocation, our friends at Sheffield University have created for us a suite of careers guidance leaflets. The Trust continues to explore new ways to help Doncaster's young people have fun learning about their environment. The Civic Trust recognises the value of producing newsletters, not only as a means of keeping members up to date with the activities of the Executive Committee, but also featuring articles on buildings, architects, streets, parks, and much more. The first Trust newsletter was produced in 1970. The first edition comprised of 2 pages. One of the first articles featured in the newsletter was about the setting up of the Tree Fund, which today is still an integral part of the Trust's activities. For nearly 30 years, it was largely written and edited by the Trust's secretary, Eric Brain. It has grown into a multi-page publication and now includes reports on the Planning and Conservation Subcommittee, which meets every month to consider planning applications submitted to Doncaster Council. It is particularly interested in those applications which will impact on Doncaster's conservation areas and listed buildings. The committee decides whether to object to or comment on these planning applications, sometimes providing a historical context where the application involves older buildings. It also looks at major building projects to determine how much impact these will have on the overall built environment of Doncaster. Copies of the newsletter are distributed to members and are eventually made available for visitors to its website for those wishing to research Doncaster's heritage and history. The newsletter, which became Trust Topics in the early 2000s, is still considered as important today as it was when it was first published. The Civic Trust seeks to inform about the rich history of Doncaster's heritage, and its walks have gained a reputation for doing this, not just in Doncaster, but also in Tick Hill and Bawtry. With a history stretching back over 2,000 years, to fit all of Doncaster's history into one walk would be impossible, so the Trust walks are focused on specific themes, such as the one, Romans to Racing. The walks are informative, engaging, often anecdotal, and they also challenge some of the more established histories. The first part of the tour starts near the Minster, where there are visible remains of the Roman fort, built in AD 71 when it was at the edge of the empire. They begin by telling the story of how the Romans first came to Doncaster and why they believed that Doncaster was the first Roman town in Yorkshire before York. The Minster is steeped in history. A church is said to have been on this site since the 11th century, and we learn about its clock with no face and its link to Big Ben. Opposite the church is the Clergy House, a building acknowledged by the Civic Trust with a plaque, once the home of Dr. Miller, a prominent author about Doncaster's history. Making their way from the Minster, winding their way through the marketplace, a market is thought to have existed in Doncaster since Roman times. The walk threads through the historic Corn Exchange and Concert Hall, completed in 1873. The tour takes in the Red Lion, another link to the racing heritage of Doncaster, where the idea of Doncaster's famous St. Leger race was probably formed. Walking down Scott Lane, Eric Brain, the author of many of the Trust's newsletters, reveals that it was the street where the market toll, or scot, was collected, and is mentioned as early as 1427. Onto the High Street, where the street's buildings span centuries, dating from the 16th through to the early 20th century, and of course, the Mansion House. Built in the mid-18th century on the site of a Carmelite priory and designed by architect James Payne, it is one of only 3 surviving mansion houses in the country. Standing on the old Great North Road, it was built by the corporation primarily for entertainment purposes and to promote the economy and social life of the town. Crossing from the High Street onto Hallgate, this street became home to many of the important people of the town. Many buildings, with a side entrance for servants and a much grander one for the lady and gentleman of the house, still bear witness to the concept of upstairs and downstairs. Leaving Hallgate, the walk leads on to South Parade. This route shows the houses that were built from late Georgian times onwards as the town expanded away from the centre. In marvelling at these buildings, we are reminded of 2 of the Civic Trust conservation battles, in stopping the destruction of South Parade and the turning of Regent Square into a car park. Passing through the Salutation Archway, once an important racing inn where many of the St. Leger horses were stabled, and into the museum. The tour takes in some of the town's racing memorabilia, such as the Gold Cup, the first Doncaster racing trophy, and the stories about many of the St. Leger winners, horses and jockeys. This experience brings home to people how much is left to explore and learn about the history of Doncaster in an interactive manner. What can be more interactive than standing in front of the Mansion House, being told its history by the tour guides? Doncaster Civic Trust is confident that its work in preserving, protecting and promoting Doncaster's rich heritage and history will be as vital in the future as it is today and has been in the past. The Trust feels that it now needs to increase the visibility of its work via the use of social media, its website and the use of video. The aim is to encourage more people to join the Trust, particularly young people, to continue the work started by those pioneers in the 1940s. Through education, it hopes particularly to encourage children to appreciate the rich heritage that Doncaster has and will continue to have through their efforts as the next generation of Doncaster Civic Trust members. At a time when the planning system encourages greater public involvement in the planning process and the Trust have a good working relationship with the local council. We think Doncaster has a great future as a place that values and protects its heritage and demands the very best in new architecture. The next 50 years promise to be a time of great change and innovation. At the Trust, we look forward to taking a major role in helping make Doncaster the best it can be.